Abacus Counselling and Training and Supervision. She's talking about supervision for addiction practitioners. Alison has a background in social work with a Masters in Health Sciences, which focused on problem gambling and suicide. She has also completed her postgraduate diploma in supervision at Massey University and is working in counselling, management and training roles. First off in the alcohol and drug field, and for the last 12 years as the HR Director of Abacus. That's correct?
Yes. Well, 12,
right,
the week after
we're
next.
already 5 minutes in. Thanks,
Okay.
Alison.
Okay, my presentation's really mainly aimed at the New Zealand audience and the changes that we're about to be having probably this year around supervision, but hopefully it might have some relevance for some of you overseas in regard to supervision as well. First off, there's about to be some changes in supervision, and I just wondered what you are going to run a few scenarios by you and wondered what you think. So we've got Bob here. Just wondered if you think this is okay. Bob loves supervision. He has been attending fortnightly with the same supervisor for 10 years. Bob's supervisor doesn't have an addiction background, but he knows Bob so well now that he can manage the personal as well as the professional, and he really keeps Bob on track. Is this okay? I think there's a number of issues in that one. First, maybe show of hands. Bob's been seeing his supervisor for 10 years. Is that okay? Yes? No. No. Okay. Bob has no addiction background. Is that okay? No? No one thinks yes? Sorry? Oh, Bob's... yes, yeah, Bob does, sorry. And is there a mix between counselling and supervision going on there? What do you think? Yes? No? That part's okay? That's okay? Okay. All right. So is this good practice? We've got Amanda now. She's been a gambling counsellor for 12 years and she changes her supervisor every 2 years without fail because she wants to make sure that she has a range of different perspectives on her work. Her current supervisor has a very extensive AOD background but no problem gambling specific knowledge. Amanda has come to dread supervision because her supervisor is really challenging but believes that that probably is really very good for her. What do you think? Well, I think that comes down to a few things. Changing your supervisor every 2 years, is that good practice? Hands up for yes. A few tentatives, a couple of definites. Her supervisor's got AOD background but no problem gambling. Is that okay? Yes?
I think there is differences.
There's differences, okay. Might need some education. And thirdly, Amanda dreads supervision. Is that all right? Is engagement important in supervision? Is just being challenged enough? Okay. And just one more. Is this appropriate? William's been training hard to be a TA therapist and has completed 7 years of study. He's required now, in order to get his accreditation, to have monthly supervision with a TA therapist, but his workplace will only pay for a DAPANS registered supervisor, and he can't find one who has DAPANS and TA background. His workplace insists that the supervision is clinically focused and prioritises addiction issues, and the manager has said that William's not to get sidetracked on underlying issues. Does the employer have this right? Possibly. Just a bit of mumbling. Just to set some thinking in terms of the changes that are about to come about this year, in fact, or by the beginning of next year, about registration of addiction supervisors. And just, in a MI kind of way, put some good things and some not so good things up there in terms of what might be good ideas and around this. So one of the good things might be about standardisation, that people will need to have a certain amount of experience, a certain level of qualification, etc., in order to be a registered supervisor. They'll need to be well qualified. DAPANS will set what those qualifications are. The supervisors will need to be experienced in working with addictions, so Bob's supervisor will not be able to continue to supervise him unless he does some further training. And supervisors are going to be held much more accountable for their supervisees' practice. I mean, for many years, as a supervisor for DAPANs, you've had to sign off on an annual basis. But the expectation is now that if, for example, the supervisee was investigated for their practice, the supervisor will also be held accountable for that and will be asked around what's going on, which is probably a good thing. You might note that I've also put it on the not so good list. It's kind of, there's a mixed thing there, I think. The not so good might be that it limits the choice of supervisors. Some of the people who are currently supervising in the field may not be able to do so at the moment until they gain some further qualifications. And for people who have other registrations like social work or psychology, nursing, etc., they will now need to either find someone who has both or have 2 lots of supervision to meet professional requirements. So these are the requirements for those of you who are not familiar. It's DAPANS, which is the Addiction Practitioners Association of New Zealand. I know that the acronym doesn't fit. It's the Drug and Alcohol Practitioners Association of Aotearoa, New Zealand. But the competencies were redone in 2011 and gambling was added in, and Ian did call it DAGPANS for a while, but didn't seem to run, and now it's smoking cessation as well. So these new requirements, I'll just talk a bit more, and it's going to be finalised in 2015. So for a supervisor, there's 6 new things. 1, they have to be a member of DAPANS. 2, they have to hold DAPANS registration for 2 years, or be a member under one of the Health Practitioners Competence Assurance Acts, psychology, nursing, etc., or social work, or New Zealand Association of Counsellors or Christian Counsellors, again for a minimum of 2 years. They'll have to, well, come 2015, demonstrate competence in relation to either AOD or gambling or both in order to meet the requirements of the competencies that are laid out that, as I mentioned, were redone in 2011 with gambling and smoking cessation. They need to be able to demonstrate their ability, and that will mean a report from their own supervisor and also 2 reports at a minimum from current supervisees. Some of the detail of this is in the process of being worked out. They also need to have completed a minimum of 3 years clinical practice in the last 10 years in the addiction field, which might be supervision. And they need to have undertaken training and supervision from a DAPANS approved trainer. And DAPANS will be making the decision this year who those trainers will be or which courses will be approved. And number 6 is pay your money. So currently you need to be a member of DAPANS and you need to pay your money. And that will all change by the 1st of January 2015. Everybody will need to meet all of their requirements by then. And from July this last year, DAPANS will now only accept supervisor reports from DAPANS accredited supervisors. So there's a project on at the moment. There's a reference group which I'm on. There's within that there's social work, psychology, nursing, Mātua Raki sits there, youth, there's a range of people there. And the aim of that, of bringing this guide together, which that comes under DAPANS, but Paula Parsonage has been contracted to pull all that together, which is excellent because she's very good at that. And it will hopefully clarify some of the questions that there are at the moment around qualifications, the level of experience. There's lots of different questions out there at the moment around how much supervision do you need to have in a year, does group supervision count, all those sorts of things. And hopefully at the end of this process we'll all be a lot clearer. And the aim, it's not just an aim, it will happen. There'll be a guide that comes out of it that will have 3 sections within it. So practitioners, supervisors and managers should all be really clear about what the requirements will be in order to be a part of DAPANs. And it will include problem gambling. And I should have put smoking cessation, it will include that as well. So, as the reference group has had one meeting so far, and the first hour or so was taken up by what it should be called. Shall we use clinical or professional supervision? I have a very strong preference personally for professional supervision because I think it's more encompassing. Clinical can be a bit too, people think about clinical as being just around your casework, and I think that's too narrow. I think it needs to be more holistic than that. So that's the definition that comes from Te Pou. So that says it includes clinical, academic, management, leadership. Yeah, I think it needs to include, I think quite a lot of people said in that first situation with Bob that supervision should include the personal, it should include work-life balance. And I know, for example, that I have one piece of supervision that I do with an organisation who have strictly instructed that supervision is to only be clinical. Now, it's my belief that it's very hard to get into supervision on the clinical unless you have a relationship with the person in the first place. And to build the relationship, you need to know about not only their work, you need to know about their work-life balance. And out of that comes, I mean, if you're going to talk about your clinical work, you actually are doing quite a lot of risk-taking in that, particularly if you talk about the things that you don't do so well. So the engagement is critical. So I think that this is the definition that will probably be used within it. Advantages for the organisation. I think there's some excellent advantages for the organisation and have a strong belief in an organisational focus. It will tighten up initial contracting arrangements, but further down I think it will bring about consistent use of three-way contracts so that there's a closer relationship between the supervisors and the organisations. I mean, traditionally in supervision people have often gone off to, they drive off site and they go away and they see somebody, and the organisation really has no idea what they're paying for or what the person's doing, and maybe at best they might get an annual report. So setting up processes in advance around how it will all work is I think a very helpful way forward. And I think in some cases it opens opportunities for supervisors to meet together so that they're supporting the organisation. The Salvation Army in Auckland does that, has 6 monthly meetings that they host so that the supervisors have an opportunity to come together and express any concerns that they have, you know, on behalf of their supervisees, really. And I think one of the advantages of a slightly limited pool of supervisors by bringing in the requirements is that the supervisors actually get to be much more familiar with the work of the organisation. So rather than every supervisee in the organisation having a different supervisor, there is a smaller pool, and there's some things that need to be managed around that, but they get to know the organisation really well and they get to know the work of the organisation and the addiction field better. And the other part of that is, of course, that supervisors should have a good awareness of the health and safety and employment legislation, which really goes a long way to support the organisation. And I just popped up an example of something of where it went wrong. This is a SIFS example where an employee was away with stress. The GP sent 2 letters to the organisation saying that they should be removed from frontline duties and that they were suffering stress. So they came back to work, were put back on frontline, and the GP wasn't contacted. So the court upheld that the fair and reasonable actions were not taken by the employer, and they were held to account for that. So I think that if supervision had been in place, there could have been a resolution to that so much earlier than that. There's the opportunity for the supervisor, if they have a relationship with the organisation, to go back to the organisation and say, I am very concerned. What are we going to do? You know, a collaborative approach. Further advantages is that the employer gets to understand supervision a bit better as well. quite often I think employers get a bit confused between counselling and supervision. So it's an opportunity for education for the employer. And for the supervisee, they have more support. It's not happening in isolation. If everybody's having supervision as part of a professional development activity, there's more talk about it, and generally just becomes a general piece of their work. Just popped up a few challenges for the supervisors. Given that there is a smaller pool, one of the challenges is to always remain neutral, which of course is good modelling anyway in terms of the work that we do. Keeping the organisation and the individual in mind when you're doing. It's not just kind of, if you have a supervisee who is talking consistently about how bad the organisation is, it's about kind of gathering more evidence and not just taking things just entirely on what that person says in that moment, particularly if they're very stressed. I mean, it may be the case, but it's information gathering is important. And the considerations, again, with a smaller pool of supervisors around supervising different members of the same team, particularly where there's conflict, and across different management levels. I personally, again, see great value in that. I think it really helps you to put the picture together of what's happening in the organisation, and I strongly believe it's possible to hold confidentiality within that process. The other challenge is making sure that knowledge and training is up to date in the addiction, both the addiction field and in the supervision field as well, so that kind of you're aware of all the models that are out there and do what we always do and kind of work eclectically, pull on them at different times to fit with that individual. And the last one is, of course, in keeping with the conference, keeping up to date with technology, Skype, email, those sorts of, and whatever else might be in there in the future for us, really. So, opportunities, I think for supervisors, it's often been, particularly for those who work independently, it's quite an isolated role, so it enables the supervisors, if they're meeting to support an organisation, to work more as a collective, and therefore promotes job satisfaction and also helps role development. And I believe that it contributes significantly to organisational well-being and safety. So, our experience, addiction knowledge is really important in addiction supervision. I've certainly heard some scary examples of where things haven't been picked up, and sometimes you're supervising quite junior practitioners and really rely strongly on an experienced supervisor to help pick up safety issues and concerns, so that is important. And supervision knowledge is also very important. I mean, historically, basically you get to be a supervisor by getting older, is how it's been. And there is age helps, I think, but there is a little bit more to it. And knowing the models, even just choosing what's appropriate for different people, I think really helps your practice and really helps standardisation. So that, which in turn creates safety. So if supervisees are coming to see supervisors and kind of are a bit concerned about what's going on, they should be a lot clearer about what they can expect if there's some standardisation and if people have been trained. And I've been saying it a few times, but I do think it's really important. Supporting organisations doesn't mean that you're not an advocate for your supervisee. It means that you're kind of seeing the whole picture and working out how to, I very much see it as often a jigsaw puzzle. You're putting all the different bits together with the knowledge that you get from a range of different sources and hopefully coming out with the best outcome for everybody within that. And that's me, I think. Oops. Yes. Plenty of time for questions?
Yeah, time for questions. Up the back.
I kind of struggle with the word that now supervisors are now accountable. I sort of think that the terminology is quite negative, and I think that mentoring scenarios, and you're also working with a diverse range of organisations and kaupapa Māori, and I just think that just the standardised thing that we are now accountable. I think I consider myself always accountable, but just the wording just seems so negative.
No, that's good.
It's quite scary, actually, I think.
Right.
And not that I'm saying I'm scared of
Yeah.
my practice, but I just think the word just is blanket sort of quite negative.
Well, thank you. That's good feedback and helpful for the group. I think three-way agreements are really helpful. Of course, you can never truly know everything that goes on. Certainly any ideas that you have around kind of a better way of putting that would be helpful as well. I think what that was about was trying to get away from a situation in which has happened a few times where the requirement is that somebody to be a member of DAPANS is signed off by their supervisor. And you could have situations where a supervisor signs off the supervisee as competent to practice, but they've actually only seen them once in a year. So one of the things that will come out of this will be a requirement around the number of sessions. And I think the word accountable came out of the fact of kind of stopping that practice. But I see what you mean, it's too wide. It goes much further than that. Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Alison.